Amanda,
Clay.
do you like scary movies?
Yeah, I think I do. Do you like scary movies?
I do, and I think a lot of other people do too, and we cover a lot on our show, but there are a lot that I think people are fans of that we don't cover, like, say, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street Part 5, the Dream Master or whatever.
All of the Halloween franchise?
All of the Halloween minus 2 of them, I guess. But we want to change that because Halloween is approaching. It's a very spooky time. We want to give you more horror movie content. So what we'd like to do is on Patreon, we would like to start covering these franchise movies one by one so we can really dig into, the worst that horror movies have to offer instead of the best. But in order to do that, we have to hit a certain level of fundraising on our Patreon, which you can help us do. So if you like what you hear on Rotten Horror Picture Show, you can head over to patreon.com/thepenskyfile and sign up. And if we reach our goal, then we'll be bringing you more horror movie coverage, and you'll also get access to all the other stuff we do at the Pensky File, which includes other sci-fi film reviews, Star Trek rewatches, content consumption discussions, and so many other things. I don't know how we have time to do any of this.
It's a lot. It's a lot of material.
It really is, and I don't have a job currently. Even more reason for you to sign up for the Patreon. So if you'd like to do that, Amanda and I would love to bring you some more horror movie content. So thank you guys, and happy early Halloween.
Spooky Halloween.
Hey everyone, welcome again to the Rotten Horror Picture Show, the podcast, the horror movie podcast where we talk about movies off of the Rotten Tomatoes 200 Best Horror Movies of All Time list. My name is Clay, and with me as always is Amanda. Amanda, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. If you're listening to this, you're probably thinking, wait, this isn't Rec. They said they were going to do Rec next time. And we were, but we realized that this episode was going to be our Halloween show. And Rec doesn't exactly scream Halloween as much as it screams too real at this point.
Yeah, seriously.
So we called an audible, and we're going to do Fright Night tonight, which is I think a very appropriate Halloween-y type movie, I think.
Yeah, it's pretty much a classic.
I think so, too. It's number 110 on our list, and it has a 92% Rotten Tomatoes score with a 94.263 adjusted score.
Wow.
Yeah, it's weird. These things continue to be so strange because it's like 92%, but it's 110. It's fairly high. This is
pretty high.
Yeah, it hasn't broken the Shining barrier yet, but it's pretty close. Had you seen this before?
I had, like, a really, really long time ago, to the point where I almost forgot that I had seen it until I was sort of, I think I blended this and, like, the Monster Squad in my head.
Sure, they are very similar in a lot of ways.
Yeah. One is like, what if the kid was 12, and this one's what if the kid was 18 or whatever.
Right, yes, yeah.
But yeah, when I read, like, the little blurb about this, I was like, oh shit, I do know this movie. Yeah, so I was excited.
Yeah, this one, this is a weird movie for me because the first time I saw it, I did not care for it, but it just has something about it that stuck out to me and, like, kind of stuck with me. And so I kept going back to it maybe, I don't know, maybe every year or so around Halloween. Like, I'll throw Fright Night on. And it has, I don't think it's a better movie than I did initially, but I do really, really enjoy it. It's a lot of fun. The performances are really unique. The cast is really great.
Unique is a very diplomatic way to put it.
The music is really stands out, and it's very much a quintessential 1980s horror comedy.
Yes.
In a way that you don't get too much of anymore. But yeah, we're going to take a quick break. We'll play the trailer, and then we will get into it.
What would you do if you accidentally discovered the house next door was occupied by something not human? Something horrifying. Something unspeakably evil. No one believes you.
Mom, I didn't have a nightmare.
Not your
They
mom.
did kill a girl over there.
Not your girlfriend.
Charlie, is this some sort of a trick to get me back?
Not even the police.
Look, I know it's crazy. I know that, but look, Lieutenant!
It knows that you know. You'll do anything to protect yourself. But it will do anything to protect its secret. Fright Night. If you love being scared, this could be the night of your life.
Okay, Fright Night, or Fright Night. Number 110 on our list, directed by Spider-Man himself, Tom Holland. Written by Tom Holland, starring Chris Sarandon, William Ragsdale, Amanda Bierce, Roddy McDowall, Stephen Jeffries, and a boatload of repressed sexuality. Amanda, what happens in this film?
Teenage Charley Brewster is a horror film junkie, so it's no surprise that when a reclusive new neighbor named Jerry Dandridge moves in next door, Brewster becomes convinced he is a vampire. It's also no surprise when nobody believes him.
Mm-hmm.
However, after strange events begin to occur, Charlie has no choice but to turn to the only person who could possibly help. Washed-up television vampire killer, Peter Vincent. That's what the synopsis says. So, Clay, a few things you will find in this movie include...
Hit me.
Call girls who take cabs to the suburbs at 4 p.m.
That's just being polite.
Yeah, they're just very punctual. The Gap's 1985 fall vampire line.
Great wide collars and stuff. It's fantastic.
Yeah, lots of sweaters with very loose necks. Teeth.
Yep, lots of teeth in this movie.
Lots of teeth in this movie. Questionable policing. And of course, questionable parenting.
Gotta have it.
This movie was a goddamn home run for questionable parenting.
Yeah, there's it's such a very specific type of questionable parenting in these movies from the 80s.
As in like absentee parenting.
Yeah, it's like but Charlie's mom isn't I guess she is absent for like the second half of the movie, but she's like trying to make an effort, but she's also trying to be like the cool mom who's like more of a friend. And I feel like that's the way a lot of these parents are in these 80s movies. It's either they're absent or they're not they're trying to be unconventional, and neither way seems to work.
Yeah, like the scene like the scene where you're introduced to Charlie's mom. She says to her 17-year-old son and his similarly aged girlfriend.
Even though they both look like they're 40.
Oh my God, they both look like they're like 42. But the mom says to them, "Oh, were you having a lover's quarrel or a lover's spat or something?" And then when Charlie is, as a teenage boy would be, like, "Mom, stop it." She's like, "Oh, no, this book about divorce says that it's important that you fight, that you're able to fight before you get married."
That's just good storytelling, because the mom is clearly divorced. So you're getting a little bit of insight into where she's coming from and how she doesn't want to pass on her failing marriage to her son. And that's what this movie is really about, is about a mother trying to prevent her son from making bad romantic decisions. Yeah, that's what this movie is about for about 38 seconds. Mm-hmm. Well, what it's really about, it's a fairly classic setup. Like, one of the things that I really appreciate about this is how it's such a I just didn't want to say classic again, but I'm gonna. It's a classic setup of the very, very much Rear Window type thing, where it's someone's being nosy and their nosiness gets them in trouble, and starts to their nosiness causes them to think a certain way. Where traditionally in these stories, the person who's being nosy finds out that all of the evil and maliciousness they perceive is not that at all. But the twist in this is that he is 100% correct in that his next door neighbor is a vampire and is murdering people in his town.
But is it a twist? Because we realize as an audience pretty quickly that he's right.
It's not a twist in like the classic sense of it. It's just a twist on that sort of. Oh,
I get what you're saying. Okay.
Story structure. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
Which I think makes for a really fun movie, because my favorite stuff in this movie is the scenes where Charlie knows that Jerry's a vampire. Jerry knows that Charlie knows he's a vampire, but nobody else in the scene knows that Jerry's a vampire. And so it's a lot of like shooting looks at each other and innuendo in the way they're saying stuff. And
there's so much innuendo in this movie.
Of all the things in this movie, the characters, the music, the great special effects, my favorite scene in this movie is when they go to Jerry's house and have him drink the holy water, because the way that Jerry or Sarandon plays it is, even though Peter Vincent doesn't believe anything that's going on, and he's like, it's just going to be water, just do it it's going to be tap water, just do it to make the kid feel better. Jerry still is a little bit hesitant to do it, just in case it is actually holy water and they're pulling one over on him. And that little bit of acting is just my favorite part of this movie.
I can see that. No, I love that scene. I think my favorite scene might be when Amy, Charlie's girlfriend, and his friend ?
They have
evil Ed.
Yeah, they seem to be friends by like necessity more than the fact that
right by like the transitive property of high school or something.
Right, yeah.
I don't know. When the two of them show up to Charlie's house and they go into his room and they open the door and he's like transformed his bedroom into like a Catholic shrine.
Yes, like he had just watched Carrie and really liked the decor in Carrie's house.
Exactly. And he's just sitting there like whittling the fence posts into stakes, and they're like, "Hey, how you doing, buddy?" And he's like, "I'm fine.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna murder my neighbor."
Yeah.
It's like all these candles. I love that scene.
That's the other thing that I think is hilarious about this, is how reasonable everyone is about Charlie's perceived insanity. Like, they're taking him to Jerry's house to do this fake like vampire test. They're treating him like he's a 6-year-old and not someone who is old enough and capable enough to actually commit murder.
Right. Like, and so that's why in our things you'll find in this movie, I threw in the questionable police work, because like, all right, so Charlie becomes convinced that his new neighbor in the spooky house next door is a vampire. And he immediately calls the police because he thinks Jerry, the vampire Jerry, has been killing women in the town.
It's actually something that you don't see in these movies very often, is where his first instinct is to call the police, and he actually does it.
Yeah, which is kind of interesting. But then, like, so the cop brings this teenage boy who is, like, informing to them.
Yes.
To the potential serial killer's house.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
And just like, he's like, yeah, come on in. We're going to confront this guy who you're pretty sure is killing people.
And this guy's a lieutenant who's made detective. He's not new on the squad.
But it's just so, like, why would you bring... Like, I kept thinking over and over again while I watched this movie, these kids are underage.
Yes.
Like, it loses sight of that real fast.
Yeah. Well, you know, one of the things I did want to bring up is this is actually a really good movie to talk about my narrative cone of vision theory.
Yes.
Because by using the cops the way that they do, they take that element off the table very quickly. And it keeps everything fairly focused in, so your action is only surrounding Jerry and Charlie and Amy and Evil. However, I will say they do break outside of that a little bit in the club scene where Jerry just kills two guys for no reason.
Also, I just like the club. Mm-hmm. It's so stupid.
Well, if that club scene was 90 minutes long and in black and white with subtitles, it would just be a girl who walks home alone at night.
Aww.
I'm saying that as a compliment.
Oh my god. Yeah, this movie does do the sort of the sort of narrative cone, as we've termed it, in a really interesting way, because it is very, you know, there are extras and sort of background characters, but the central cast remains pretty tight. If anything, you know, probably halfway through the movie, it actually sheds a couple people.
Yeah, the mom just disappears. Yeah, exactly.
But at the same time, we also sort of get this we were kind of joking before about, you know, this sort of offhand comments about Charlie's mom being divorced. And then we know that they're high school students. We see them in high school briefly. That feels a little bit like it maybe didn't really need to be included.
Sure, yeah.
Like, I feel like it was included because the demographic of you know, the audience demographic.
Yeah, I think so.
This movie probably wanted to reach at the time was, you know, like teenagers.
Yeah, it's interesting. Can you do a teenager movie that doesn't have them either in school or at a summer camp? You know, like you have to show that they are teenaged somehow. So it can't just be like, this is in the middle of summer vacation, because if it is, then it usually takes place at a summer camp. And if it's during the school year, they have to have a scene when they're at school.
That's very true. I think the closest thing I can get to that, and it's not quite right, is I Know What You Did Last Summer.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, but they're technically not really high school students, because it happens when they graduate high school in the summer between that and college.
Yeah.
So even that's a little bit of a stretch, but it's approaching. Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if there's a cut scene from that movie where it's like the last day of class or something before they go into graduation or some shit like that. But they...
Yeah. Yeah, like a Scream style... like sitting outside on this luxurious, enormous high school campus in California.
Yeah. But yeah, this one is weird when it comes to that narrative cone thing, because they do keep it very focused in on these characters, but there is a lot of action that just like splays outside of this of this tight circle, because, you know, they get rid of Charlie's mom, but they also have the scene where Evil fights Peter Vincent and gets staked and dies in Charlie's house. And so theoretically, when she comes home, she's going to wonder why the banister of the stairs is busted and there's a dead boy in her living room. It's going to bring up a lot of questions that she clearly doesn't have at the end when everything's back to normal.
Yeah, it's also just that's a very time-consuming scene.
Yeah. And also, I think what it brings to the point that it brings up for me is like that stuff doesn't matter. Like that's the point. Like asking those questions, I feel like people are just doing it to be snarky because it doesn't matter what happens outside the core of the story, you know?
Yeah, I mean this movie is very much like a prime example of the sort of like 80s teen focused movies where to like sort of ask these questions is almost like you're either just going to drive yourself crazy by asking these kind of questions, right, or you're trying to like poke holes in it and like poke holes in a logic that the movie itself doesn't really claim to have.
Right. And like that's just takes the fun out of everything.
Yeah.
Like nobody's watching Back to the Future going, I wonder how the Libyan terrorists got to California, you know?
Yeah, and similarly in this movie, you're not wondering how or why Jerry Dandridge or Dandridge, I think it's Dandridge.
Yes. Yeah.
You're like his past, his history isn't really something that comes up. You just know he's a vampire and therefore he's probably older than he looks. But like,
right.
We don't worry about his origin story. We don't ask ourselves, how has he ended up in this small town? It's all kind of like, it's so besides the point.
God, I would. Could you imagine if there was a scene where Jerry just like talked about his past? Like if ever there was a scene that I would specifically hate it, because I mean this is another one where it's the information you're getting about the characters is the information you're getting from the action of the story, and you get everything you need about everybody's relationships and because you're seeing how they relate to each other through the action of the story. You don't need any background stuff. You don't need that peripheral stuff. It's actually a pretty tight story in that sense.
Yeah, the only place where for me it sort of starts to veer off is the whole Amy looks like his dead beloved thing, which is just so like it's so out of left field. It feels so weird and creepy because she is a child.
Right.
And he is very old.
And it's such a I don't know. I feel like it's a pretty unnecessary story beat to have, you know? Like they do that stuff in vampire movies, Dracula movies all the time. I hate it when they do that in Dracula. I think it's stupid. But like does he really need more of a reason to go after her other than to mess with Charlie?
Yeah, I mean or the fact that she's pretty. Like
sure. I mean, if you want to be shallow about it, sure, Amanda.
I mean, he clearly is. All he cares about is what she looks like.
That's true.
But no, I think it's another case where, like, so much of this movie is also created as an homage around, like, classic monster movies and, like, vampire flicks. And I think the inclusion of that is definitely, like, a nod to those old Dracula movies.
Yeah.
Even if we don't particularly like that kind of style of storytelling or that plot point, but it's just like the reference is why it's included.
What's interesting about that specifically is they always use that as a way to humanize the bad guy. Like anytime that they put that into Dracula, it's always to humanize Dracula and make him seem less of a straight up monster. Because it's always like, oh, he had this lost love and he just wants to be loved by somebody. And so he sees this woman that looks like the reincarnation of the one woman he loved, which is why he has to do the bad things so he can get back to the love that he's missing. And in this one, it's just like, nah, she just looks like an ex-girlfriend of mine, so I'm going to bite her. Like, he's not, Jerry's not, like, looking for anything. Like, there's no attempt to make him, I shouldn't say that. There's no attempt to make him, to humanize him or make him less than a monster, really, in the way that they traditionally do this stuff. He does get bits of kindness, probably isn't the right word, but like that scene where he bites Evil in the alleyway is really kind of what's the word? I don't want to say he's being compassionate, but it's just
homoerotic.
Yeah, that's in there. but it's just like he's appealing. Obviously, he's lying to him to some extent, but he's appealing to the clear outsider that Evil is, and offering him like a path that he can go down that will make him immortal or whatever, and is not just biting him for the sake of biting him and killing him and stuff.
Yeah, no, there definitely is some sort of, even if it's sort of like self-serving, there's still a level of like, I'm gonna extend this to you. Right. Like I'm gonna offer you something.
Right.
Which I think is like part of the whole seductive vampire thing, is that like the vampire figure is seductive because it's offering you something you're not getting in your normal life.
Teeth.
So teeth. You're not getting enough teeth in your normal life.
If you're tired of your teeth growing straight and short, then become a vampire, because you get a lot more of them and they go all sorts of different ways, apparently.
All sorts of directions. No, so I cannot move past Jerry Dandridge as a name.
I love it. It's so good.
Like, there's no, like, Malachi, whatever,
right, yeah.
or...
No, it's so
Jerry.
great. It's just such a, it's such a suburban small town vampire name, It's why can't he be named Jerry?
He can and he will, and he'll wear his Gap sweaters with pride.
Yes. So what do you think about the character relationships? We talked a little bit about Evil and Charlie, and even Jerry and Evil. But I think they are... Charlie and Amy are a very interesting romantic couple, because I never even really get the sense that he's all that into her.
Yeah.
And if he is, it seems like their relationship is... It's weird, because he very clearly, at the beginning anyway, wants to have sex and it be a more adult relationship, but he does not treat it that way in any sense of the word for the entire movie, essentially, because he's blowing her off to look at the guy next door who might be a vampire, and he's into Peter Vincent and all this kind of stuff. And their relationships are fairly childish to a certain point.
Oh, absolutely. Like, yeah, the whole opening scene with Charlie and Amy sort of like rolling around in Charlie's room making out, and then him pushing her to have sex, her saying no and getting mad at him, him getting mad at her saying no, and then her being like, no, all right, let's do it, and him being like completely taken in by, I forget if it was Peter Vincent or the neighbor moving in at that point. Yeah, it's first of all, that scene does not age well.
Yeah, well, I would argue that it does, because that stuff still happens very often.
Oh, I'm sure it does. I just mean more of like that's maybe I should phrase it this way. That's a tough introduction to Charlie if we're supposed to feel like he's the hero of the rest of the story.
Yeah, you don't see Bilbo Baggins doing that in the first scene of The Hobbit.
Even Frodo, his privileged grandson, doesn't do that.
Right.
Or nephew or whatever, I don't know. But yeah, the relationship between the two of them is sort of like, why are these two people dating?
Mm-hmm.
The relationship between Charlie and Evil is like, are they even friends? It's kind of hard to tell.
Yeah, they seem like they're friends because they were the two losers at school who happened to sit next to each other. And because Charlie is not particularly nice to him at any point in the movie.
No, he's really not.
He's kind of a dickhead across the board to everybody.
Yeah, Charlie is an extremely unlikable protagonist.
Yeah. Which goes to show you how much all of his friends and family care about him, because they go well out of their way to try and help this guy in what seems like a delusional exploit.
Yeah. And I kept making jokes the whole time I was watching it about the fact that, like, there's so little chemistry between any of the actors and each other, except all of the actors and God, what's his name? Sarandon, who plays Jerry. Mm-hmm. Like, he has chemistry with everybody.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard not to.
I mean, but it's just so funny because it's just like Charlie is like ignoring his girlfriend to stare longingly at the man across the street, and it's like it just throws off the whole. I don't know. I just found it hilariously distracting.
Yeah. And even Jerry and his buddy there, whose name I can't remember. Is it Billy or something like that?
Yeah. His
Billy,
house boyfriend.
Yeah. They have a really interesting relationship that is, you can read into it whatever you feel like reading into it, I guess. It's not explicit about anything, but there is definitely some underlying stuff going on there. I guess, what's interesting too is I guess before they started shooting, the director, Spider-Man's Tom Holland, did that thing where he asks the cast to write down biographies for their characters. And I feel like usually when I hear that, it's like, okay, that feels like a theater school exercise kind of thing. But in a movie like this, I actually kind of appreciate it because the details about each character, like we were saying, doesn't really expand outside of the story that you're watching. Having that stuff, the actors having that stuff written out and they know where it's coming from informs a lot of the decisions that they can make. Like I know Sarandon and Jonathan Stark, who played Billy, had like a whole thing worked out about how they had met and how they had been together for like 800 years or something like this. And that's stuff you never see in the movie. But them knowing that affects the way that they're going to interact with each other in the movie. So it's
right.
Yeah, that stuff is interesting to have underneath.
Yeah, I didn't realize that was, kind of going on in the background of this, and it makes a lot of sense. Especially for characters like this where they are going to have these very long histories together. Yeah.
And who we haven't talked about at all, Peter Vincent yet, who is...
God, I love him.
He is such a great character.
He's so much fun.
Yeah, and I'm kind of surprised. I guess he's sort of cut from the same cloth as like a Doc Brown type, but he's very specific to horror movies because he's a televised horror host, which in the year 2020 is not a thing that really exists anymore. There's a few of them, but
such a shame.
Yeah, we were watching it last night. Your husband was kind of making a joke about how Peter Vincent is apparently working for a local cable broadcast showing horror movies. And I said, yeah, that's what they did. They were all over the country from like between the 1950s and I think probably around the 80s. I think they had started to really die out. On all of these local channels, they would do these horror movie shows where you'd have a host dressed like, our first one was Vampira. Zachary was a big famous one for on the West Coast. I'm sorry. No, that's Philadelphia. And they're all kind of like campy representations of horror movie characters who are kind of making jokes and snide comments about the terrible movies they're showing. And that's where Elvira comes from. Elvira is essentially a distillation of all that stuff into the bustiest form, I guess.
The final form.
Hello, darling. It's me, Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, the sassy lassie with the classy chassis. Oh, thanks for bringing me into your home. Now, when are you going to clean up this dump? And put some clothes on? Jeez. I know what you're up to. You think you're pretty smart, don't you?
I'm as smart as a cook in a cheap chow mein joint.
Oh, that's smart, huh? You know, the fact that you decided to stay home with me for the next 2 hours and watch this turkey tells me a lot about you. Tells me you couldn't get a date.
That's basically correct.
So you thought you'd get your jollies by watching she-demons. You're just hoping that some sleazy, cheesy sexploitation flick with beautiful girls running around half naked, their breasts heaving against their flimsy, shredded blouses, their milky white thighs beckoning from beneath their tattered skirts. That's what you're after, isn't it?
Yes, precisely.
So, I guess that means you're tired of me.
And the only two like mainstream ones who still exist are Elvira and Joe Bob Briggs. Joe Bob Briggs is a little bit different because he's not really like I guess he's there to tell jokes, but he's not as much of like a camp factor as Elvira is. Elvira very much is still in that vein.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, it's a really interesting history that I really am bummed that I never really got to experience, because it sounds like something that would be right up my. I would totally be Charley in this movie, absolutely, if I was in high school in the 80s when this stuff was going on.
Oh yeah, and I think that's part of what makes this movie so much fun is that if you're a fan of horror movies and scary movies, even if you're like me and you think Charlie's kind of a goon, you still see something of yourself in him. Right. It's just like, yeah, we probably like would have been reluctant friends in high school. Like I probably would have said all sorts of awful shit about him to his face. But we then would have been like, yeah, but did you watch Fright Night last night? Yeah, I did. It was a really good one.
You would be the person he comes to about the vampire stuff.
I'm Evil Ed.
Yeah, essentially.
I'm fine with that. I mean, I don't really want to die as a weird wolf creature, but
I don't know. Maybe not Evil Ed. You might have been like Amy's friend who thought Charlie was kind of a nerd, but at the same time, like was kind of like, actually, you're using that steak wrong. You got to spin it around.
Yeah.
Fun fact: movie director Paul Thomas Anderson directed Magnolia, Boogie Nights, etc. His dad, Ernie Anderson, was a horror host in Cleveland named Ghoulardi. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. But yeah, Peter Vincent, name comes from cross between Peter Cushing and Vincent Price. And he's very much a send-up of the Vincent Price, of the characters those two played in the 50s and the 60s mostly. And he's just so much fun. And he's very similar to me to, I don't know how familiar you are with Batman the Animated Series. But there's
somewhat.
Do you remember the Gray Ghost?
Oh God.
It's an episode where Bruce Wayne has to go meet this actor who played this character, the Gray Ghost, that he watched all the time when he was a kid. And someone is committing crimes, copying stuff from the Gray Ghost show, and so he has to go team up with the actor who played the Gray Ghost in order to take this guy down. It's very similar to this, actually.
That sounds really fun.
Yeah, it is. It's one of the top 5 best episodes of that show.
All right, I'll have to track that one down because I watched I know I have seen a good amount of Batman the Animated Series, but I don't remember like in what order or how much. Like I have no reference point, so I'll have to look into that one.
If you're looking for a podcast to help you guide your way through Batman the Animated Series, I might recommend
plug
the Badass Podcast, where myself and DC Comics artist Sean Murphy talk all about the Batman the Animated Series show. But anyway, plug over. How did you feel about the music in this?
I mean, I thought it was great. Like, so much of this movie makes me laugh just because it is so, like, it kind of takes all of the, like, 80s teen movie tropes and then a bunch of the older, like, monster movie tropes and just, like, cranks it up to 11 and then removes any of the excess and the fat, like, from it. To just distill it into this kind of pure, ridiculous form. And I feel like the music's a little bit like that too, where it's so 80s, but it's also so monster movie that it's really fun.
Yeah, this movie top to bottom is very much of its time. Whether it's the fashion or the music choice. Like the music is this great synthesizer score done by Brad Fiedel. I think he's pronounced it Fidel, or maybe it's Fiedel. I'm not sure.
Fidel's probably right.
Who did the music for Terminator? Yeah, and he's got this motif that plays throughout the movie, and then there's this great moment towards the end that for some reason just felt like such an of the era moment where Jerry is about to seduce Amy, and he puts a tape into a tape deck and plays the music from Fright Night.
Yeah,
like the score to the movie. He just has it on cassette tape.
Right. And that's his seduction music.
Yeah. And I love his stuff. And also the other fun thing is all of the other songs in this were specifically written for the movie and the scenes that they're in. So that's why they're all kind of like campy horror movie songs, is because they were written specifically for the movie, which is pretty fun.
And the Jay Giles band song Fright Night that plays at the end is definitely written for the movie.
Yes. Yeah, I'm trying to think of what else we to talk about.
I do think there's one interesting comment that Peter Vincent says to Charley that I wanted to bring up.
Sure.
I don't remember the exact phrasing, but he pretty much says when he tells Charley that he's broke and that Fright Night has been canceled and he's packing up and he's leaving, he says that all people want to see now are virgins getting massacred by psychopaths in ski masks. And I thought that was really interesting because I think that quote is kind of like the whole ethos behind this movie.
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah.
Yeah, we're like this kind of hits smack in the period where, like, you know, you had this amazing boom of movies in the 70s that were all like, you know, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and like
Exorcist.
Yeah, and you had all of these movies that were more about like existential terrors or social terrors in terms of like serial killers and mass murderers and like one psychopath in a mask with a knife.
Right.
That moved you away from things like Frankenstein and the Wolfman and Creature from the Black Lagoon and Dracula. And this movie is sort of a love letter back to those older movies in
totally.
A lot of ways.
Yeah. It's you mentioned Monster Squad before, and it's very much in the same vein as Monster Squad. I when he said that line about the hockey mask killers massacring virgins, my first thought was, Peter, let me push my glasses up here. Clearly you're not watching these movies because the virgins are not the ones who get massacred.
Oh, Clay, this is why we're friends.
But no, I think you're 100% right. And what's also interesting is Tom Holland, Marvel's Spider-Man, was before this. The reason that he got this job more or less was because he had written Psycho 2. Which is
really?
which is obviously the sequel to Psycho, made 20 years after the original, and that's from 1983, which is right in the pocket of the slasher boom. So Psycho 2 is actually a lot bloodier than Psycho is. Psycho 2 is like a direct response to the new era of horror movies that were being made, and so I wonder if that has something to do with it too, where he's coming off of writing a much more bloody version of Psycho and following that up with Fright Night, which is almost like him saying, that stuff is fun, but it doesn't have the finesse and the fun that these movies used to have.
Yeah, that's really interesting because especially considering like in the context of Fright Night, where this movie, it has some great special effects. But it's surprisingly non-violent.
Yes. Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. Yeah. There's not a lot of killing. There's a lot of there is killing in the movie, but like there's not a lot of, you're not seeing a lot of like throats getting cut or anything like that. It's mostly monster makeup.
Right. Like most of the violence is perpetrated against the monsters, at least the on-screen violence.
Yes.
Like there's lots of like once evil gets turned into a vampire and Peter Vincent burns him on the forehead with the cross, and then eventually they have their big fight in Charlie's house, and then of course there's the climactic fight in Jerry's house where like Billy, who is this sort of like human familiar kind of thing. Like he's human, but he's not. So he gets shot, but he also then like gets back up. So the violence against him is kind of different. There's just, compared to things like Texas Chainsaw Massacre or even Halloween or Friday the 13th, like there's not a lot of random innocent bystanders getting attacked. Like,
right. Except for those guys in the club.
Right. There's those guys in the club. But even when Jerry comes into Charlie's house to try to kill him one night, he says something to Charlie like, you better keep it down. I wouldn't want to have to kill your mother, too.
Right, yeah.
And he's kind of being serious. Like, he actually does leave the mom alone.
Well, he gives Charlie an out. Like, in that scene where he comes in, he's like choking him out, and he says, forget about me right now, and this will be the end of it, and we can both go our separate ways. And then Charlie obviously says no.
Yeah.
And his response is like, you idiot. Now I'm going to have to kill everybody.
Yeah. He pretty much quotes Jack Torrance and just says, we'll forget the whole thing.
Yeah. How did you feel about Chris Sarandon's vampire acting? Because he's so like suave and cool when he's a human, but as soon as he gets like to vampire form, he just like turns it up to 13.
Yeah. I don't know. I have such mixed feelings because, again, I think it's just I think it's almost distracting how much they emphasize how like suave and cultured and charismatic he is, because it's like you can't give him sexual tension with Evil Ed.
I don't know. Can you?
But you kind of but it happens. Like you can read that into it, and it's almost so extreme that it's distracting.
Does there have to be a limit on who is attracted to the seductive vampire?
No, I don't think there has to be a limit at all. I actually think it, in my opinion, it makes more sense that he is so compelling and overwhelming to almost everybody in the whole film, because then it justifies why everyone's having such a hard time just killing him already.
Right.
But at the same time, it's just weird in the context of this specific movie. Because it has this weird effect of like kind of emasculating Charley in so many ways.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, like you were saying, once he transforms even a little bit, like even just like his eyes go red or whatever, all of that disappears so fast that it's just, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it. It's almost like he's playing two different characters.
Yeah. I don't know if maybe he's just like trying to project through the makeup or something, but he gets real weird once he starts turning into a monster. But there is my other favorite part of the movie is when after he stabs him in the hand with the pencil and he starts to turn into the monster and he's like getting all of his fire up about talking about how he's going to kill him. Kind of to your point of avoiding collateral damage, the mom wakes up and he does this sort of like, huh? Like clicks his eyes over like he doesn't want the mom to catch them doing stuff after like curfew or something.
Right, like he's also a teenager who's going to get in a lot of trouble if mom finds out.
Yeah, and it's so funny. And it's just such a really great beat where it's like even all of this just feels like so much fun is being had. And it's even though it's kind of like a story about kids touching the void of adult stuff, it still doesn't really, it still kind of feels like people playing monsters and stuff. It's fun.
Yeah. So something else I wanted to bring up that I think we're kind of skirting around a little bit as we talk about all of this. How do you feel about how this movie handles vampire lore and the sort of like quote unquote rules around being a vampire?
I'm fine with it. I don't have any hard line vampire rules that I think need to be followed. Because, first of all, I don't know if they even know what they are in this movie because they're kind of playing pretty fast and loose with stuff as they need it in the scene that they're doing. Because sometimes apparently Charley is a very religious person because the cross works for him no problem every time he pulls it out.
Well, so the cross thing is honestly my main problem because it works. I'm even okay with the concept of it only works if you have faith in it. I'm not okay with that concept as it's applied to Peter Vincent. Because he uses it successfully on evil.
Right.
And then later on, it's like, haha, it doesn't work on me because you don't have faith. And it's like, wait, but it worked on that other vampire.
Right, which is a shame, too, because, like, that's such a great culmination for Peter Vincent to have his whole thing of, movie host for these shitty movies on the back, on the last hole of his career. He doesn't have any belief in himself, blah, 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 gets pulled into this situation where he has to actually, for real, do the stuff that he does in this movie. And that culminates with him actually being able to use this cross because he has the faith that it's going to work and he does believe in himself. That would be fantastic. But yeah, they do kind of undercut it with the Ed scene.
Right. They could have had a literal come to Jesus moment.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So that I bring it up because that aspect of it bothered me. I know when we were kind of doing our chat about it last night, I forget who it was, but maybe it was even a couple people brought up that they thought that Evil's transformation into the wolf was kind of like stretching it. Like, oh, well, now what is he, a werewolf now? And I'm like, I'm actually willing to buy that because
Dracula could turn to werewolf.
Exactly. Yeah. He could turn into a wolf. Like he could turn into a bat and a wolf. And I'm willing to like let that ride. It was the inconsistency of the cross thing that bothered me.
Well, you bring up that scene with Evil. I found myself feeling really bad for him in this time around because like he is such a outcast and he can't find a place in the world. Like Charley thinks he's a doofus. Amy's nice to him, but he kind of doesn't really like him either. Jerry lures him to the dark side with promises of finally having a place where he can fit in, and then he gets staked through the heart by Peter Vincent and then just dies this really horrible elongated death. And it's, you know, Peter Vincent has this look on his face as it's happening, is like he feels real sadness for this guy who's this wolf who's turning back into a teenage kid and then just dying. And I was kind of right there with him. I was like, yeah, I feel really bad. Evil's just such a pathetic character that deserved he could have done with a happy ending.
Yeah, I actually agree. Yeah, I feel like the character of Evil, there is something like as grating as I found him. I called him like a proto Matthew Lillard.
Sure, yes.
But yeah, there is something like pathetic about him in the literal definition of pathetic, like inspiring pathos, like making you feel for him. Mm-hmm. Where it's like Charley is not that great either, and Charley treats Evil like shit.
Right.
And yeah, there's something kind of just sad about the fact that like when Jerry kind of comes to him and says, you know, take my hand and I will give you this, you know, this place to belong, and he starts to cry.
Yeah, exactly.
As he like, yeah, and it's very like, oh, okay, like to me that was extremely relatable. Like, I don't know about you, Clay, but being a teenager sucked.
Yeah.
And like, it can be extremely alienating to be a teenager, and to have somebody who is powerful and older and suave and attractive say, here, like, you're gonna have a place with me. You're gonna belong. You're gonna be safe. You're gonna be appreciated. Just come with me. Like, that's a very relatable desire to have.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Did you ever see the remake of this?
I did not.
No. It's interesting what they do differently. And one of the things that they do a little bit differently is, well, the mom sticks around. The mom is actually a fairly prominent character, which is interesting. And the other thing is, when Evil turns evil, he's got a lot more to do. And so you get a little bit more of him like really reveling in the newfound power that he has. So he doesn't come off as pathetic in that one as he does in this one. And I don't know if it's a change for the better or not. I think mileage probably varies on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I can see how it would be interesting to explore like a character that's similar to this version, but slightly in a different direction.
It's the remake. The remake. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead.
I was just going to say the remake overall is pretty fun. It's not. It's probably a lot better than it has any right to be. And the highlight.
It's Colin Farrell, right?
Yeah, Colin Farrell plays Jerry Dandridge, and the highlight is
Jerry Dandridge. I can't.
I know.
I'm sorry.
I can't get over. I've watched this movie 5
Gergich?
times. Yeah, I've watched this movie 5 times, and I still can't get past Marcy Darcy from Married with Children playing like a sexy teen. I didn't watch Married with Children, so that doesn't. Yeah, that must have just. I think that was like just outside in that valley between us age wise. Probably. But the highlight of the remake is Peter Vincent played as a scummy Vegas Chris Angel type by David Tennant, which is
my god.
Yeah, it's a ton of fun. I would recommend it. It's a pretty fun watch. And it's written by I believe it's written by Marty Noxon, who was one of the big writers on Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Oh yeah. Oh no, that actually sounds fun.
Yeah.
All right,
yeah.
I'm going to add that to my personal list.
Yeah, definitely do. I used to have a personal list, and then I started 8 podcasts.
Don't worry about it. I'm trying to finish my fucking master's degree this year, and I'm just writing about slavery and the Holocaust. So,
Ooh, yeah.
my personal list is taking a back seat to just unrelenting horror.
Well, I'm glad we can help add to that with this show.
No, this is great. This is such an escape.
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah. Do you have anything else you want to talk about before we wrap it up?
Just real quickly, I would just like to say that women don't fare well in this movie.
No, they don't.
There aren't many of them to begin with. There's 2.
Well,
And,
3 if you 4 if you count the women that Jerry kills. There's 3 that have
Fair.
speaking parts.
Fair. But no, really. Let's count the 2 that Jerry kills,
Yeah.
because then that means that 2 of them get murdered.
Mm-hmm. One of them yep, go ahead.
disappears.
Yep. Technically, I was going
Right.
to say, technically the other 2 both disappear because Amy is very much taken off the board for like the last third of this movie.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm getting at, is that like it's interesting. I think about this movie. I tend to do this. I tend to compare whatever we're watching and talking about to the things the last couple immediately prior.
Mm-hmm.
So I keep thinking about, like, you had made this really great point when we talked about The Fly, about how even though her boyfriend / boss, Stathis, whatever his name was.
Stathis Borans. How dare you forget the greatest name in cinema history.
I can't help it. It's so bad. But you made a really good point that even though he's brought in and sort of helps in the final confrontation, he's kind of immediately like removed from action.
Mm-hmm.
And then like Gina Davis is allowed to sort of like own however things turn out and like save herself.
Sure.
And this ending is very much the opposite of that ending.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like Amy's been kidnapped and taken away and sort of seduced by the enemy and almost becomes the enemy. Yeah, there's just like she's essentially a non-entity for so much of the end of this movie that it's almost remarkable of how much her character just disappears.
Yeah. Well, it's really kind of much like the source material they're drawing from, very much a traditional horror setup, because I don't know if we've talked about this at length at all, but like horror movies were a male-dominated genre till like 1968. It was most of the movies were more like this, where like if you have your Hammer movies or your Universal movies, it's usually a guy who's the protagonist who has to save a woman from the clutches of the monster. And it wasn't until you get to the late 60s and the 70s where that starts to shift. And it's one of the interesting things I find about the shift into the slasher type movies and how much misogyny gets thrown at them, because the shift happens where it now goes from women becoming the damsels to be rescued by the men who then fight the monster, into now it's the women who are fighting the monsters who are almost exclusively male. And so it's a really interesting shift that happens. But yeah, this is a lot similar in setup to a classic mid-60s, 1950s and before horror movie in that way, yeah.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting how in like later slasher movies there's a weird like merging of a couple different character tropes, where like women are still the damsel in distress in a way who needs to be saved, but they also start to merge into the role of protagonist.
Right.
Whereas the male figures are still there and, like, you know, taking action and doing things, but they're also starting to merge into the role of villain.
Right. Yeah.
Whereas in this movie, it's much more clear cut. Like, here is the bad guy. Here is who he's after. Here is the love interest. Like, here, everybody's just sort of in their own little, like, silo.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And Amy, it's strange how much they take her. I feel like ultimately the way she's used is fun, in that they give her they kind of put the ticking clock on her to an extent where it's like she's going to turn into a vampire if they don't kill this guy. And so they take her off the board so Charley and Peter can fight, and then they bring her back as this fully formed vampire monster at the end, which I think is a lot of fun. But as far as what she's doing in the movie, she does kind of get removed from the story for a decent amount of time.
Yeah, I think part of just what bothers me is just that, like, I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like she has a pretty well-formed character pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Like, we all have either known or encountered that like type of girl in high school who, like, I don't know, she's a little more mature than her peers. She's kind of like just kind of dealing with them a little bit. Like, I always really appreciate her relationship with Evil Ed. Like, I think it's this really interesting where they're not friends exactly, but they do seem to both understand each other in a way, and they give each other a hard time, but they, like, I don't know, their interactions just feel very genuine to me.
Sure, yeah. Well, yeah, it's like they have one thing in common, and that's Charley. You know, like, that's
right.
a very high school kind of relationship where it's like you have your friend has his girlfriend, you're fine with your friend's girlfriend, but it's not like you're going to hang out.
Right. But there's something so authentic about the way that they then interact, where it's halfway between I don't even want to know you, but also, like, you're almost my little brother at this point.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so to have her transition, like, very quickly into almost this other character where, like, all of her own, like, freedom of choice is completely removed from her. Like, I know it is very, very much an homage to the older monster movies, but it's a little jarring. And it's I think for me, like, there was a comment I made when we watched this where I said, I always want at the end of this, like, Charley to, you know, he goes and he looks out his window at the very end at the house across the street. And I always wish, like, Amy stood up behind him and it turns out she was still a vampire. Just to give her back something of, like, I don't know.
Yeah,
I just feel like that would be more fun. I feel like that would be more interesting direction to take her character than, oh, she's just back to just being his girlfriend.
Right, yeah. She's the she was the prize that he won, and et cetera, et cetera. Yeah,
exactly.
We were joking, though, about how the one thing that definitely probably is not believable about the end of this is her going back to Charley after being with Jerry Dandridge. At the very least, she's going to be into exclusively college guys, if not college professors.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, so just to wrap it up, this is number 110 on this list. Do you think that's too low? Do you think it's too high? Do you think it's appropriate?
I keep coming back to our where is The Shining question. And that's at like 104, right?
The Shining is 101. I'm sorry, 103.
Okay. I just, part of my problem is like that is the only reference point I can really hold in my head.
Right, yeah.
And I feel like it skews all the others. Because The Shining should be somewhere in the top 15 or 20.
Yes, yeah.
And so to think that this is only like 7 spots away from The Shining, I'm just like, abso-fucking-lutely not. No, cannot be. Please move it further up towards 200.
Yeah, yeah.
But at the same time, if I look at it in the context of like the full list, I actually feel like it's not a horrible place for it.
Yeah, I don't think it's bad. I think I would probably push it down a bit, maybe to like 120 somewhere. Yeah, okay. So number 120 is The Exorcist. Would I
Oh my god.
Would I 1-for-1 flip The Exorcist and Fright Night? Yes, I would. So
Clay, what is wrong with this list?
yeah, I don't know.
Who is rating these movies?
I don't know. But yeah, there's a lot of good stuff that's lower than Fright Night. The Thing is 138. Would I put Fright Night higher than The Thing? I would not. So I think there's a few there that you could I would swap out and totally be fine. Like I guess I would say, does my feeling about it change if it's number 138? No, that feels appropriate. Does it change if it's 120? No, that feels appropriate. So I think somewhere in there, in that sort of like middle quarter or something like that. I think probably the middle quarter.
Yeah, somewhere between like 115 and 140.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's going to do it for Fright Night.
I'm so jealous of how well you roll your R's.
This is Halloween. It's a spooky, spooky time. Do you have a favorite Halloween candy and or movie that you watch every Halloween?
I mean, so I feel like you can guess my favorite movie.
Yeah, let's pick a different one. No, you could stick with that if you want. I'm not gonna.
I mean, it honestly is like Halloween is my favorite movie to watch around Halloween.
Mm-hmm.
It's just so perfect. It's got the jack-o'-lanterns and the kids running around in costumes and the leaves on the sidewalk and the whole 9 yards. I don't really know. If you forced me to think of another one to say, I could probably come up with it, but I would need a minute.
Mm.
And in terms of my favorite Halloween candy, it's definitely Reese's Cups.
Yeah. I'm a ride or die.
So good.
Ride or die Reese's peanut butter cup person myself.
Really nice.
Oh yeah. And
Right.
I don't know if I have one specific movie I come back to, but I do around Halloween time come to these. I skew more towards the classic Universal or Hammer type movies, which I love in general, but they do very much feel more Halloween-y because I think there's so much pomp to them, and the costumes are so more elaborate and stuff. And it's weird. I actually kind of go back and forth because I remember when I was in high school, on Halloween I would always look for either Friday the 13th or a Nightmare on Elm Street movie to be playing on like AMC or something like that. So I kind of go back and forth, but I think if you something with a monster more often than like a killer, like Dracula or The Howling. I love The Howling, which is not a classic one. That's an 80s one, but it's still it is much like Fright Night. The Howling is very much a homage to the classic kind of horror movie, which I think is a lot of fun.
Yeah. I could see if you made me discount Halloween, I would say probably a good old Bela Lugosi or something with Boris Karloff, or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
One of those. Frankenstein, Dracula.
The two things that are fighting for my my money right now are the Ultimate Blu-ray collection of Friday the 13th movies that they just announced, and also the Ultimate Blu-ray collection of all of the Universal horror movies, which has been out for a while. Yeah, I'm really conflicted as to which one of those I would like to own, but
We should just split the difference and each of us get one, and then we can share.
that's fine. Sure, why not?
I'm down for that.
We'll just trade off whenever we want to watch. When you want to watch Return of the Invisible Man, and I want to watch Friday the 13th Part 7, then we can switch off.
That sounds great. I'm down.
So yeah, that's gonna do it for Fright Night. I hope everyone has a happy Halloween. I'm bummed because usually we get together with friends and we do like a pumpkin carving and watch a couple horror movies thing.
Yeah.
I guess we're not doing that this year.
Perhaps not.
Probably not. So hope everybody is having a good socially distant time and not being the real monster and spreading disease.
Yeah. Wear your mask even with your Halloween mask.
Yeah. So yeah, that's going to do it for Fright Night. We will be back as scheduled previously with Rec next time. So Thank you guys. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you, Clay.
And we will see you next time.
Bye, everybody.